All right, hello everybody. Miss Lynch here. This is chapter 13, and it may or may not be a two-parter. So we'll see. I feel like there's a section in here when it gets political, and I don't go through that in a lot of detail. So I think I might go through it quick enough that this becomes one video and not a two-parter, like I said. So we'll see what happens, okay? Be a wild ride, full of surprises. Okay. So, chapter 13, we are um, seeing some things happen in the US, and they will come to a head by the end of this chapter, okay? Which we'll see. And this will take us into the Civil War, which will be the pinnacle of our semester, all right? So, how bizarre, we're almost there, right? Okay, anyhow. Alrighty, hopefully you guys are ready to go. You have all your stuff in front of you, and here she goes. Okay, chapter 13, A House Divided, 1840 to 1861. All right. Okay, so looking at the 1840s, the fruits of manifest destiny. Um, Talked about manifest destiny a little bit before, and I imagine you've heard that term in the past. Um, but So this, but really what it means is it's this perceived notion that it's God's wish for his followers to expand and conquer people and places in their best interests, but ultimately in his name. Okay. But so this starts to really focus on continental expansion during the 1840s, and that's kind of where we're at, right? Which expansion's been, a theme for us all semester. It's taken place in stages from the colonies through the old Northwest to the Mississippi, and then, well, first to the Appalachian Mountains and then to the Mississippi. And now we're going to the Pacific Ocean. So we're going all the way across the country, okay? Um, yeah, all right. So in the 1840s, slavery moved to the center stage of American politics because of territorial expansion. Think back to Missouri, the Missouri Compromise, which was this key example of the importance the discussion of slavery played in westward expansion in permitting new territories to allow slavery. That's a very important conversation, all right? So, during this time, like I said, we're now going all the way to the West Coast. So, people are crossing the Rocky Mountains. They're going to Oregon and California. All right. Utah is also a hotspot during this time. Okay. This was all part of Mexico during the time that we're talking about, which we'll get to. Okay, so yeah, many believe God wanted the U.S. to expand to the Pacific Ocean. This is the tenet of manifest destiny. Okay, so the Mexican frontier. This involves New Mexico and California. All right, so Mexico won its independence from Spain in 1821. And so by that point, it was nearly as large as the US in population, with about 6.5 million people. Okay, the northern frontier of Mexico was Texas, Santa Fe, which is in New Mexico, and California. This was sparsely populated and surrounded by indigenous land. All right, so California's non-native population, so 1821, the same time, was vastly outnumbered by first Americans, approximately 3,200 to 175,000. Okay. The Mexican government dissolved the Great Mission land holdings, which that goes way back to what we had talked about, our traveling bands of um, Spaniards who went west and set up missions. Okay, we talked about that in chapter two and three, I think. Okay, so this system is dissolved during this time. I don't know why I can't say dissolved today. Not a tricky word. Okay, so by 1840, um, through New England ships, California was linked commercially to the U.S. We won't really be until the railroad, the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, which will happen in 1869, that uh, there's like mass migration west. Okay, alrighty. So this takes us to the Texas Revolt. All right, so the first part of Mexico to be settled by significant numbers of Americans was in Texas, which makes sense. It was the furthest east, so the closest in proximity to the majority of Americans. Okay, this movement was led by Moses Austin, which is where the city of Austin gets its name. This began in 1820. All right, he was from Connecticut. He was born to a farming family, and he made an agreement with the Spanish government to colonize this area. Sorry, I got so parched all of a sudden. Okay. Alarmed that its grip on the area was weakening, the Mexican government in 1830 annulled existing land contracts and barred further immigration uh, for Americans going there. So Stephen Austin, who was Moses' son, led the call for American settlers demanding greater autonomy within Mexico. And those who were of Spanish origin, known as the Tejano, supported Austin. All right, so Mexico had abolished slavery. I guess I'm not there yet. Okay. Mexico had abolished slavery, but American settlers were allowed to bring their slaves. Remember, this happened in the old Northwest too. It was important for people. They felt it was important for people to be able to do this. Okay, so General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna sent an army in 1835 to impose central authority because the rebels formed a provisional government that soon called for Texas independence. So this is the Texas Revolt. And this brings us to the Alamo, which is the definitive incident in this whole revolt, right? Okay, so March 6th, 1836, Santa Anna stormed the mission compound known as the Alamo. Remember, our missions had been away, so that building in the Alamo was a mission as part of this whole system, all right? 187 defenders were killed. The next month, Sam Houston routed Santa Anna's army, winning Texas independence. And Texas desired to be annexed by the U.S., but neither Jackson nor Van Buren acted on this because of political concerns regarding slavery. All right, so settlers still moved there regardless. Okay. Sorry, I was just trying to decide how much into detail I want to go. I'm going to kind of skip through this one a little bit. But James Polk was elected in 1844. Okay, so next slide. The road to war. All right, so within his presidency, he really had 4 clearly defined goals, just to reduce the tariff, reestablish the independent treasury system, settle the Oregon dispute, and bring California into the Union. Okay, so he initiated war with Mexico to get California. Fighting started in the border area in Texas, and this land was claimed by both countries. So this was a point of tension. Okay. There we go. All right. So the war and its critics. I'm going on to the next slide. All right. So although the majority of Americans who were inspired by Manifest Destiny supported the war, a vocal minority feared that the only aim of the war was to acquire new land to expand slavery. This was mostly Northerners who were um, opposed and fearful of this. All right, so some people were opposed to territorial expansion. All right, I'm going to move ahead. Maybe. All right. Okay, so combat in Mexico. All right, so combat took place on 3 fronts in California. Um, okay, Santa Fe, and then central Mexico. All right, so I wasn't too in left field mentioning Santa Fe a little while ago. Okay, and then the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed in 1848, where the U.S. gained California and New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. All right, this is 500,000 square miles of Mexican territory and made up roughly a third of their nation. Okay, so the land annexed had a population between 75 and 100,000 Spanish-speaking Mexicans and an indigenous population of over 150,000. Okay, so the Texas borderland. Whenever this happens and borders shift, some residents overnight become aliens. Okay, some Mexicans were expelled from areas that were then considered to be U.S. territory. Okay, so this is confusing and problematic in a lot of different ways. Okay. Okay. All right. So race and manifest destiny. So imposition of the American system of race relations took away the freedoms of many residents in this area. Mexico had abolished slavery and declared people of Spanish, Native, and African origin equal before the law. Okay, so all of this just goes back to this territorial expansion and the conversation that was being had about expanding slavery. Okay, this ties into that. So the Texas Constitution adopted after independence not only included protections for slavery, but also denied civil rights to people of indigenous or African origin. All right. Okay, so then this takes us to California, because now this is U.S. territory, right? All right, so Gold Rush, California. So the non-native population was less than 15,000 in 1848. By 1860, it climbs to over 360,000. So in the 1840s, 5 times as many settlers went to Oregon as to California. So that shows just westward expansion, but how popular the Oregon Trail actually was in reality. Okay. But so all these people are going to Oregon to begin with. And then gold is discovered at the beginning of 1848 at the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains near Sacramento. And then everyone pumps the brakes and they start going to California instead, all right? So California's gold rush population was incredibly diverse. So we have Latinos, Americans of all backgrounds, Europeans, Chinese immigrants, Australian immigrants, all right? And between 1849 and 1852, so just a 3-year period, approximately 25,000 Chinese immigrants would come to the West Coast, not just California, Oregon, and Washington as well. But, okay, so, all right, regardless of where these people are coming from, in regards to gender, so to speak, the people coming over were mostly young men, all right, either single men going out on their own or men who were married or had families who were going to establish themselves and then send for families later on, okay? But while it was mostly men, it wasn't entirely men. And it's also important to note that women who were going west And this is largely because of Westerns, but the way they are depicted often is, farmers' wives, homesteaders, or sex workers, which is fine that those two professions existed during this time, but that's not it, right? There's a lot of other work that was being done by women throughout the entire West, okay? So women did things like run restaurants, which were kind of just becoming a new thing. They started in Britain mostly and became popular as far as European influence, okay? But so women are running restaurants during this time, boarding houses, which is huge because all of these single men who are going west need rooms to rent, okay? Largely doing this renting from women, okay? So boarding houses, huge way of women earning income during this time, okay? Also, laundresses, okay? Cooks. So restaurants, like I said, are becoming popular, but working as domestic servants. All right, so housekeepers, cooks, laundresses, and then also, like I said, sex work did exist, so that is part of it too. But yeah, so those are some things that women are doing during this time. Like I said, it's mostly young men, and our numbers, for the most part, men outnumbered women 3 to 1. Okay. Okay. So looking at gold, as early surface mines became exhausted, which happened pretty quickly, this gave way to underground mining. There was fierce competition in this field, and it created racial divides and tensions. Um, and they use this to, whenever situations happen like this, there are then power plays that use these dynamics, these tensions, to pin workers against one another, um, to take away from larger issues that would be working conditions. Like if all these people could get together and say, which we'll see over time how terrible these mines and working conditions were, but by dividing them and creating tensions like this, it takes away from larger issues. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Let's see. So the state legislature imposed a $20 monthly tax on foreign miners. All right. Not on domestic miners. This drove many from the state. Okay, they overran native communities and murdered thousands. Thousands of indigenous children were declared orphans as a result of the violence that spiked during this time. And yes, and many were bought and sold into slavery. Okay. So by 1860, California's indigenous population was reduced to 30,000. What did I say? It's in my numbers. Okay, I lost it, but anyway, okay. So 1860, the indigenous population is down to 30,000. Um, oh, couldn't find the number because it's after. Okay, it had been nearly 150,000 in 1848, which was the end of the Mexican War. All right, so 12-year period decimated by, 4/5 of the population, essentially. Alrighty. So let's look at the opening of Japan because this will kind of usher in a U.S. diplomatic emphasis on Asia, and it will primarily become Southeast Asia whenever we get to um, World War II and then Vietnam. But anyway, let's start by looking at Japan. All right, so the opening of Japan. All right, the U.S. Navy's Commodore Matthew Perry not from friends, sailed warships into Tokyo Harbor and demanded that Japan negotiate a trade treaty with the US. This was 1853 to 54. And as a result of that, Japan then opened two ports to US merchant ships. So 1854. The US was interested in Japan primarily as a refueling stop on its way to China. But there's that. Okay. Let me see. Okay, so I will go through this a little quickly, just because this reiterates what we have been talking about. So I feel like I can move through it knowing that we should be comfortable with these concepts already. Okay, but a dose of arsenic is this slide. But with the territory of Mexico, all of that conversation looking at California and Oregon and westward expansion and conversations about bringing slavery into these new areas. Okay. This is the ongoing political debate of the time. All right. So a huge part of this chapter is that. All right. So that's kind of what I'm saying. I will move a little quicker through. Okay. Okay. So I might be quiet just because I'm going to glance at my notes and see if there's anything that I need to call out. But I really feel like we are good. Okay, just more of that. But yeah, so there is, we're still in the 1840s. So between the late 1840s and 1861, when war actually is declared, yeah, so throughout the entire 1850s, this is going to be a political debate. Okay, so very fueled, growing in intensity. Okay, all right. Okay, so 1850, California is admitted as a free state. Okay, there's the abolition of slave trade in DC, the District of Columbia. Okay, the fugitive slave law is strengthened. Right, and that takes us to the halfway point. So let me just, am I doing 22 minutes? I think I'm going to try to go for it because there's quite a bit of stuff that I want to super get into. I think that it's okay. No, I'll do the right thing and call it the halfway mark. Okay. So I will pick up with the fugitive slave issue, which becomes a huge point of contention between free and slave states. All right. So that's where I will pick up uh, next time. Okay. If you guys have any questions, please email me, and otherwise, I will talk to you later. Okay. Bye.